Hello and welcome back to the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. We're here in studio today to talk about the event that was Performance Marketing World Unlocked 2025, the third edition of the brand's hallmark annual event that took place over the 4th and 5th of March at the Business Design Centre. For this conversation, I'm joined by my editorial colleagues, Jyoti Rambai, our premium content editor, Robin Langford, the brand's editor, and our news reporter, Reem Makari. And we just talk about some of our highlights from the event, the sessions, the panels, the presentations and interviews that really stood out to us, some of the lessons that we learned. What did we take away from discussions, not only with those on stage, but also amongst the delegates who attended throughout those 2 days as well. And as a special treat for you all, following that discussion, you will get to tune into my conversation that took place live on the main stage of day one with Calfreezy, the YouTube sensation and podcast host, entrepreneur, founder of the Fellas Studios, over 8 million followers across YouTube, Instagram and TikTok. And he talks all about his 15 years in influencer marketing and how brands can go about building long-lasting relationships with influencers and the changes that space has seen. So you've got that discussion with Calfreezy to look forward to after the PMW editorial team breaks down the event that was. With that said, time to sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. PMW editorial team, Robin Langford, Jyoti Rambai, Reem Makari, how are we all doing?
Tired.
Yeah. Good. Reinvigorated.
Reinvigorated, Robin, tired, Reem. We are
recovering.
Recovering's the right way. We are recording, of course, in the wake of Performance Marketing World Unlocked Part 3, the third edition of the event that took place the 4th and 5th of March at the Business Design Centre in London. And yeah, I think knackered is the sentiment here in the office. But we've been blessed with such a lovely day today. I'm in shorts. The sun's out. It's really warm.
It's very nice weather.
It is, yeah.
It's like a reward.
Huh? Joe's not in the Birkenstocks yet, though. You will. That's when he's really happy.
The Birkenstocks are coming. I think I can even squeeze them in before Cannes this year. So the Birkenstocks are on the way. We're not quite there, but it's double figures and double degree temperature and sun. So that means shorts for me. But we're here today to talk not about what I'm wearing to the office. We're going to talk about Unlocked, the event that was. We're going to talk about some of the lessons we learned, some of our personal highlights, and some of the things we can maybe expect to be percolating between the next event. So why don't we dive in with some of the peaks of the event, some of our highlights, if we can recall. Jyoti, what about you? What jumped out to you this year as a highlight?
I don't know if I'm going to be biased, but I would definitely
just talk about your own sections.
Yeah, but yeah, I actually really enjoyed interviewing Grace Andrews on stage on the first day. I think she had some really insightful stuff around building your personal brand and making sure it complements your company brand. So yeah, that was definitely a highlight. And so was the in-house versus outsourcing agency debate. We had a lot of people in the audience wanting to ask questions to our guests, I guess.
Now, if I'm right, I think in-housing won that debate, but you were saying there was quite an interesting trend that happened during it where the vote sort of swayed in the middle of the debate.
Well, I think so. I want to see so we did a poll at the beginning of the debate and at the end with the audience about whether they're looking to change their marketing model. Yeah, I feel like it did swing towards in-housing some elements, but I want to check the polls first so don't count me on
it. It was a tight race, that was for sure.
It was definitely very tight, but I do think in-house sort of nipped it in the end.
Interesting. On the personal branding, that sort of leads to a highlight of mine, which was main stage day one. I had the pleasure of interviewing YouTube sensation Calfreezy, who you'll have the opportunity to hear that session at the end of this discussion here on this episode. But he is a bit of a personal brand in and of himself. And it was crazy to me to find out this guy, Calfreezy, he's not even 30 years old yet. And he's been in influencer marketing for 15 years, which is longer than a lot of the brands that were present at Unlocked. It's an insane amount of time to be present across social platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and the like.
He must have started it as a kid, right? When he was a teenager. Yeah.
I think a lot of these influencers start by being like playthroughs and being on FIFA or Call of Duty. I think he talked about that. That was very popular back then. Some of the big YouTube influencers like PewDiePie kind of grew from that kind of base there. I think Calfreezy was one of those, as was the Sidemen.
And it shows that maybe there's a bit more longevity to influencer marketing than first thought. And Calfreezy was very good talking about how he's had to develop his sort of content and his brand and the way he engages with partners and brand partnerships in particular, and how he's sort of consistently changing that approach and reworking things to suit his audience and maintain authenticity. But that journey and that progression was really interesting, and it showed to me that maybe there's a bit more longevity to the influencer space than I initially had thought, because I'd been a little bit of a Luddite at that. I thought, how can you do this for so long?
Especially if you have your own platform and you kind of turn it from just a name, just like, doing normal influencer content, to actually becoming a proper business platform.
Absolutely.
And you go beyond whichever social media.
Well, and how do you maintain an audience that's sort of growing up with you? If you're not constantly developing and growing, you're going to lose that audience. What about you? What was your highlight?
Well, I am also going to be choosing ones that I've done, sessions that I've done, because I didn't have a chance to actually attend all of the other sessions. But on the YouTube note and influencer note, I interviewed Jordan Schwarzenberger, who's the manager of the Sidemen, on the main stage on day 2. And I mean, he's also been in the game for a long time. Like we spoke at the beginning about him having started as he was a CCO at YMU, which is a talent management company, at the age of 20. And now he's the manager of the Sidemen. One thing that stood out from that session was he spoke about how brands don't need to rely on influencers anymore, because brands can become their own creators, which I thought was very interesting. And you kind of see it already with some like Duolingo, for example, or Curry's on TikTok, and it's their own social media managers that are coming onto the platforms and making very fun and engaging and viral content. And I think we might see more of that rather than relying on other influencers, because there's a bit of a risk with relying on influencers. You can't always trust that they'll continue to align with the same values as your brand. So it's probably better to just take control of that.
He really hit home the importance of brand safety, didn't he? And making sure that, because you don't really know these days things, how they're going to age. Culturally, it's always a bit of a risk, and you might find yourself being held accountable for something that happened months, even years ago. So it's something you've got to be a little bit conscious of when you do engage in these platforms.
And I think brands are taking on people that are really influencer savvy now. It's mature enough to be like a bit like the way brands are bringing people from the agency side now. They're bringing in people from the creator side that really know their stuff. And you can see that with Curry's this last year. They absolutely, I love watching that stuff. And people used to say, oh, you can't really engage with a brand in the same way you would the personal thing with an influencer. But they're starting to be able to do that. And funny enough, you mentioned Curry's and Duolingo. There's a TikTok with Curry's having the Duolingo owl in it recently, so they really know what they're doing there in terms of we kind of owning this creator space now.
Yeah, and I mean, someone even asked, like one of the audience questions that came in at the end of the session was, will people have the ability to emotionally resonate with brands that are becoming their own creators the same way they do with influencers? And Jordan said, yes, absolutely they can, and it has happened before. And I brought the example of like Duolingo saying that the owl has died. And everyone was commenting on that, and everyone was sharing it, and sending their heartfelt messages. I think even Dua Lipa commented on it. So I think they do have that power. They just need to show that commitment and try and build an audience around it.
Because I was going to say, at the end of the day, it's all about telling a good story, and emotive stories are usually the most popular because they resonate with people, and I think that's where like creators, influencers coming in. That's what they're doing.
Emotional storytelling, that is the through line in advertising today. Robin, what stood out to you? What was a highlight that you most enjoyed?
I'm not going to say an event I hosted this time. It was more actually, as this is our third Unlocked, and I'm glad you spoke out stories just then, JT. I think it was more like the story we managed to tell with Unlocked this year was really strong. And I think that was through, we had two really good keynote speakers, our absolute industry icons, with Binet and Dr. Grace Kite. And they both opened the sessions at Unlocked this year. And they both kind of started with what perhaps a problem is within performance marketing and marketing more broadly, which is measurement is somewhat broken. People are too reliant on the old attribution models and things like that. And often that's owned by some of the big platforms. So Les Binet was talking about how we're investing too much in performance over brand, and Grace Kite was talking about how retail media is great, but it ends up kind of benefiting the big platforms like Amazon more so than the actual people advertising on it. And they kind of both posed the problem early on in the day, and the story was that if you went to Unlocked and went to all the different stages, we posed the solutions with all these experts, and some of those solutions were better measurement models like MMM, influencers and creators, experimentation, e-commerce strategy. So it was like, so I think if you were an attendee there, you could really kind of see that flow of like, these are the problems and how we can fix them. So yeah, I think that was my personal highlight. I think we had a really
fun as well. That stood out. I mean, that stage was packed across the 2 days every time I was looking at it. I know you were chairing that stage, Robin, but paid media seemed a real point of interest for a lot of our attendees.
Yeah, I think in general, people were just interested in new channels, what was coming up, and talking about all sorts of things, paid search and paid social, but of course then connected TV and everything else. And had a lot of really interesting panel about diversification of your spend on there and how not to cling on too much to channels. And yeah, I want to talk a little bit more a bit later about experimentation, which I think was a really crucial sort of take home for so many people. I got so many questions at the final debate, but I wanted to save that till later.
Yeah, you've pivoted there into, I suppose, some of the lessons that we learned throughout the 2 days. And I think that's an important point to touch on. You mentioned briefly DAC and MMM. Is it media mix modelling or marketing mix modelling? Have we decided what it is? Because it is
let's call it marketing mix modelling, and I think what was his name from DAC? Luke, he called it media mix modelling. And it's super confusing as a journalist because I think it's kind of both the same sort of thing.
Oh, they're absolutely identical, as far as I know. But if you say at the very least MMM, or as I said on stage, M&M, everyone knows what you're talking about.
So I've just Googled this, and you both come up: marketing mix modelling and media mix modelling.
Well, maybe we can poll our readers after this and say which one they use.
That's not a bad idea, but Dax, Luke Regan, he gave a presentation on the main stage during day one all about MMM, and to me that was super insightful, and it was a packed audience. But what I was doing the Q&A for this session, and what I was just astonished at the sheer volume of questions that were coming through from the audience. And it seemed that Luke really lifted the veil a little bit on MMM, which continues to be partially perhaps because of the name, but a little bit opaque because it is seen by many as an old school tactic that's been around for quite some time, that's had this modern resurgence, particularly with the likes of Google launching Meridian, but even outside of walled gardens, organisations like DAC are spearheading the MMM movement. And Luke's presentation, I thought, was brilliant content-wise, and the engagement, the questions he had from our audience, it certainly piqued a lot of people's interest, which I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, no, its essence, it's just trying to give credit where credit's due and trying to redress that balance of not just that last click of what made that sale, but all those different factors, including branding and stuff. I was just thinking about that the other day. I've been trying to buy a car. Like, how much are you influenced by what you see on an advert you see or when you search on Auto Trader versus just on the road and looking at other cars. I mean, once you start trying to buy a car, it's going, oh, that's a nice car, let's go. And so how do you incorporate that into your marketing? How do you give credit to those kind of factors? There's so many offline factors that affect those decisions. And econometrics and MMM really try and take that into account. But it's incredibly complex, and there's loads of mathematical statistical models that go into it. Like once you start saying words like Bayesian and Markov chain modeling, people start to get a bit confused by what. But I did statistics A-level, so I'm quite interested in all that stuff.
It's a similar thing, not just with cars, but I'm finding that with running trainers in particular, and it comes to colorways, the specific colors of shoes. And I imagine sometimes with cars on the road, when you're looking to purchase one, because my partner's looking to get a new car as well, and she's very swayed by the very specific colors of cars. And it's not about the model, it's not about the make, it's not about what it's got to find this certain looking car in a very specific color. And for me, when I'm trying to buy a new pair of trainers, oftentimes I'm not looking at what's good for my level of pronation, what's going to help, what stack height's going to help me run a little bit more smoothly. It's like, what colorway looks cool and how swayed am I going to be on that?
That's what you're drawn to, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It's a really interesting point. lessons learned. Josie, what about you? What stood out to you? What's something you learned?
So I took over the paid media stage at the end of day one and chaired the presentation with Ad Marketplace. And they had done this research around search and how search is evolving. And I think we've spoken about it before, about how Google's monopoly in this is in decline. And
certainly been challenged.
Yeah, but it's, from what I learned there, search is evolving so quickly in spaces that I would not have even considered. And one of those is buy now, pay later. So, like Klarna, for example, where you can make big purchases and spread the costs over a few months. Search within that. And I found that really fascinating. And I think this area might be something to watch over the next year or so.
This idea of evolving search and the increasing competition and new elements of it that we haven't otherwise considered.
Yeah, so that's just one example. We've already been talking about social media like TikTok as a search engine.
LLMs as well is another thing that popped up.
So search is expanding to just what the traditional pillar was before.
Ray might cut you off, yeah.
I was just going to say, I'd be curious to know, because social media was a big thing we've been mentioning on the podcast and on PMW, that social media is like where people are searching instead. But I wouldn't consider other platforms. But it would be interesting as well to see where's the crossover in search, because there's, I think in the Google interview that you did, the person that you were interviewing was saying that people will go back to Google after they've done a search on social.
The idea that, yes, this comes back to this idea of discovery is happening elsewhere, but decisions are made on Google. That was Diana Najdi from Google, the UKMD, who postulated that. Yeah,
and I know sometimes I'll like search something on ChatGPT, but then I'll go back to Google to verify, or like I'll search up a restaurant recommendations, go to Google to actually find the website of the place. So it would be interesting to see that crossover, and then how that plays into that conversation, and what does that mean for brands, publishers, advertisers.
No, that is interesting. And something else, like as you were talking, that came up, it's going to Google and typing in whatever you want to search, and then adding something like Reddit on so you're filtering it, you're getting to the landing page that you want to get to quicker through just Google.
And Reddit have a partnership with Google for that precise reason as well. And that leads on from what I was learning about a little bit in terms of search. Because we had, on the paid media stage, we had JP Schmetz, who was an actual .com pioneer. He invented, him and his partner invented Brave Search, which is, if you go on a browser choice screen, you'll get Google, Bing, and you'll get Brave. And so he's one of the very few people in the world that's trying to take on Google as a search engine.
Just out and
but what I kind of learned about that is the way they're still able to maintain market share is not just by sort of being a bit more privacy friendly and stuff. For advertisers, they have like one single advertiser, and they have fantastic partnerships with like Amazon and eBay on there. But also they're feeding LLMs. They're feeding in some of the biggest LLMs on the planet, as well as including Elon Musk's Grok is using Brave searches for it. So I think that's an interesting area, and I think they're also capitalizing on the fact that they're trying to reach people that might not want to be using Google search, because not everyone does. And I also learned another thing DuckDuckGo is not an independent search engine. It's actually owned by Bing, which is fascinating. But it does try and...
Well, and Bing's obviously got big ties to Microsoft, and this came up in an interview I did at Unlocked with Supriya Devpakathya. She was talking all about Copilot and everything it's doing as an LLM, and integrating with Bing, of course, and Microsoft's partnership there with OpenAI. So in a lot of ways, we've got some of these big tech players that are trying to merge into the search space across both their own search engines and bring it together with these LLMs to try and compete in the space. I'm just waiting for them to jump on to social media now and try and incorporate that.
Yeah, it's interesting when you mention about DuckDuckGo, because I don't know if you've seen one of their ads, and they put themselves up against Google, don't they? Mm-hmm. To say, like, we're better than you.
Yeah, and of course, also Brave... were one of the first. They were doing overviews, AI overviews, before Google were doing them. They're not called that, obviously, but having those kind of ChatGPT style explanations, which has been controversial, has to be said. I mean, with Google, they have always said that they're trying not to take away traffic from publishers, but there is sort of some evidence that AI already is starting to sort of fulfill that void, not getting as many click-throughs to publishers that you would have got on those original 10 blue links. So it's another area where search is changing through AI. And I think Google knows that, so it's trying to sort of move into social, move into through Reddit, and move into e-commerce, and then also AI as well. So you can see the biggest search player is trying to diversify. We know that those platforms the way people are using search is changing.
We'll postulate on the future in just a moment, but before we get to that, Reem, was there a lesson that you learned throughout the couple of days?
Mine's a bit different, and again, it's based on the sessions I've done. So there were a few conversations on the culture stage as well as on the main stage on the last day that were talking about ageism in the industry, but also how people in the beginning of their careers and ones who are much more experienced can collaborate with each other, which I think was an important one to bring to Unlocked, and it was a new conversation to have. It was things that were highlighting upskilling, especially when it comes to AI as well, and training your workforce and being able to give them enough time to learn and the resources to learn, but also giving people opportunities to move horizontally in their career, which was mentioned on stage. I think it was Natasha Phillips is the one who said that. But being able to move horizontally when you don't always want to go upwards, because there's people who are in their mid-careers that are like 40 plus that sometimes don't want to go into managerial roles or just don't really have a space in the company to go to that in that direction. They just feel a bit stuck. So it's giving them the opportunity to explore different channels, different areas of performance marketing, and doing that instead, rather than being forced into a position that they don't want or having no room for progression.
Yeah, the culture stage was terrific, I think, from what I saw. And it was a new introduction this year for Unlocked. It became that fifth stage. And it prompted a lot of conversations. I know, and this was rounded out in that 30 under 30 panel that we had right at the end of day 2. But this idea of ageism, there is a bit of an obsession with youth, not only in terms of who we're targeting with a lot of our ads, but internally within Adland as well. You could see there are people consistently finding themselves hitting a certain point in their career and they're kind of trapped and stuck. And if they can't upskill, or if they don't want to move up into these very high pressure management positions, there's no room to sort of sidestep, and you can find yourself bogged down or even out of a job, and it's quite a difficult place to get hired at the moment.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, not just affecting people who are older in their careers, but also with young people, kind of putting them into those, like, just assuming that they would do social media positions, for example, or just putting them into like the new channels and not giving them more of leadership roles. So it's one of those things. The main kind of takeaway is just being able to give more opportunities and collaborate and learn from one another rather than give stereotypes. I think that was very important.
Now, before we round out this discussion and we let our listeners enjoy Calfreezy and his insights from the first day, let's postulate a bit on the future. Unlocked 12 months' time, back at the BDC, March 2026. What are we going to be talking about? What's going to have changed between now and then, do we think? What are some of the trends that we see emerging? Or is there something that we think might be getting spoken about less?
Hopefully, maybe on the culture stage, talking more about sustainability in AI. Or is this the effect of using AI on the climate, and how hopefully how people have kind of found ways to reduce that impact and being able to teach it to everyone, because I don't think that's a conversation that's being had enough, and it's definitely something important to address.
Super interesting insights on that from our chat GPT Performance Max debate with Jamie Barnard there as well. It was a pretty bleak outlook for the sustainability in AI from that discussion, wasn't it?
Yeah, I can't believe we got through the whole Unlocked talk without mentioning the fact we had a real-life chatbot on stage.
We should have got Max in for the podcast.
But Max has he put up a good fight against. We pitted an AI chatbot against a marketing expert, Jamie Barnard of Compliant, and the audience voted that Jamie made a much better argument about the use cases for AI than Max did. So we retired him, and so it's a good example of marketers putting AI out of a job, I think, which is nice. But that said, I mean, I think next year, I think we will probably in 12 months' time, we'll probably have a few more people showing up with AI in their job title somewhere. And I think a panel that I was on was all about AI, managing AI, which was about companies that were using perhaps AI ad tech on top of Performance Max to really increase their campaigns. And some people from like B&Q and Secret Sales are saying, initially, they were a bit scared of that, but they introduced this sort of tool from Up AI into their work streams only for a little bit, and they saw some really positive changes quite quickly, and that got the team to trust it, and then they invested it across a lot of their paid media channels. And I think that's the thing, AI, managing AI, agentic AI is going to be a much bigger thing. But a nice way of rounding that up was I spoke to Ellie Abbott, head of performance marketing at Wild, which was the massive sustainable beauty brand that's been bought by Unilever for lots of money. So she was there, and she described the way it's going to change. She said performance marketing used to be a bit like you in a big fighter jet with loads of panels and dashboards and controls and stuff, but now it's going to, in the future, you're going to be a bit like in a self-driving Tesla car, and you just got to be more about the creative direction you're going to be going in. So I mean, maybe that's what it's going to be a bit more like. You'll be managing AI a bit more, I think.
No, I sort of agree, and actually you sort of draw upon one of my points I was going to make, which was around talent and how the performance marketer's job will evolve. And I think, especially for the generation that are going to be coming into, so that your junior performance marketer. So I think it was when I was talking with Sophie Miller, she mentioned that people need to be a bit more generalist when they're coming into the industry rather than be siloed into a particular role or looking at, say, just social, for example, or programmatic, because things are converging, things are becoming more interwoven, and that will mean that jobs will change to fit that.
It'll be a weird place potentially where we're at
because
the next 12 months with agentic AI converging with people having it in the job titles as well. Who knows where we're going to be?
I think because we're in a state of flux at the moment. Everything's changing, and it's changing so quickly. So I guess we're learning.
Yeah, but I didn't pick up a vibe that people were afraid for their jobs as such. I think people, generally, when people ask that question, they didn't seem to think they felt under threat. I mean, I don't know if they'll think the same in 3 years' time. It does at the moment in the marketing industry. People don't feel AI is taking jobs.
I think that's because everyone's kind of in agreement that you can have AI to take care of all of the manual tasks that can make your work a lot more efficient and faster, but you still need the human touch. And I think that's how they concluded most of the sessions is, yes, AI is good, we still need humans. So I think that's why they're not so scared of their jobs being taken.
For now, it appears the human touch is keeping us all safe. So we'll see if that's where we find ourselves in 12 months' time when we're back for another Unlocked. We'll leave that conversation there and let you all enjoy my discussion with Calfreezy from day one on the main stage. But first, a big thank you to my colleagues Reem Makari, Robin Langford and Jyoti Rambai for joining me.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Many of you will be familiar with his work. He is a podcaster, a YouTuber, an entrepreneur, and as someone who boasts millions of followers across YouTube, TikTok, Instagram and the like, he is also very much an influencer. And so to give you a brief introduction to his work before I bring him up on stage, Calfreezy, if you could, a quick clip of his best work and then I'll introduce him.
I'm giving that a 0 out of 10. What do you actually know about the Dakar Rally? Well, me neither. I'm here watching the race today, and the Toyota social media team actually wanted to challenge my knowledge. You can have first name basis. That's how I know them. We're friends like that, you see. Seb? No! Seb. That's what I said. Do a replay. The people at home will know. Seb. The second one is Lucas. All right, so since I got that question 100% right, what do I get to eat? This is one of the good foods. I'm giving this a 7.5. It's crazy because I know the answer to this. 1996. All right, okay, right. Well, hand me the bad food then. It's not the worst thing I've ever tried. I'm giving this a 4. I'm taking the word high. I'm taking the word luxe. I'm thinking like high luxury. Yes! All right. Big fan of that. I'll be right back in a bit. I love being right. I'm giving that a 9 out of 10. Has it been to space? Antarctica. This has gone too far. Oh, I thought you guys were joking. I thought it was a pepper. That's not a pepper. I'm giving that a 0 out of 10. Well, I've disappointed myself and probably everybody watching, so I'm gonna get back to watching the rally. See you guys. That one is definitely part of our, that one's definitely part of our team. Am I right? Thanks for the point.
Welcome to the stage, everybody. Calfreezy. Take a seat, Cal. Anywhere you like, mate. Yeah, go for your life.
Hello.
Cal, can I call you Cal?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Freezy feels a little bit formal, so we'll go with that. Influencer marketing, to set the scene for everybody, how long have you been operating in this space, and how long have you considered yourself, or have brands considered you an influencer?
Yeah, actually, I think in April is coming up to my 15-year anniversary as a YouTuber, which is, pretty special. It's something I'm really proud of. And the term influencer wasn't even really a thing 15 years ago. It was just cat videos and Call of Duty videos on YouTube. So we've certainly come a long way. I didn't think I'd be speaking in front of this many smart people before. So yeah, it's 15 years of doing this.
15 years is just about as long as it gets when it comes to influencer marketing, and from gaming with the Sidemen to running marathons and tasting food abroad. How have things changed in that time, and how have brands approached you differently as that audience of yours has grown over the years?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot more money in it now than there was back then, which is a great thing for everybody involved. I think one of the really big things that I've noticed is the attention to detail in terms of working with a lot of brands. Nowadays, brands don't really just come up to you, particularly maybe sort of 5-6 years ago, they would say, hey, I've got this service, I want you to promote it. They didn't care how it was integrated, where it was integrated into the video, into the content, what their brand looked like. They literally just asked me to promote their product or service, and they might give me maybe a bullet point or two to hit, and that was it. They didn't ask me for any stats afterwards. They just sort of ticked it off and said, right, okay, I've done my influencer marketing for the year. Great, let's move on back to TV or whatever the hell they were spending their money on. So nowadays, it's completely different. They want to know the creative. They want all the analytics possible. And it really is a collaborative effort now. There was certainly, I'd say about 3 or 4 years ago, every one of these talks, people were constantly saying, let the creator decide what the video looks like, give them the freedom, that's how you're going to get the best results. And I feel like all that preaching has finally come to fruition. There's certainly still brands out there that believe they know what's best, but we're slowly getting there. And it's been a really good change, but it takes... I want to say particularly on like the creator's side, it takes a lot more effort now, which isn't a bad thing, and I think it yields better results for both the brand and the creator, but they have to be on top of it. And you have to remember, a lot of these creators, when they're growing up or moving into this space, they really are just used to putting a camera in front of them, making the content, posting it, and that's it. So that when a brand comes to them, they don't necessarily even understand what the brand is trying to achieve. And this is actually one of the really big things that I always want to ask the brand, like, okay, by working with me, what are you actually trying to achieve here? Are you trying to simply get clicks? Are you trying to, is it a brand awareness piece? Like, what are we actually trying to do here? Because if you tell me that, I can service you a lot better in terms of the content, and I can make this sort of, you can go and speak to your manager and be much happier about how things have panned out. Whereas if I don't know that, I'll kind of just go off and do my own thing, and then we might not end up with the best result for either of us. So it's really an education piece as well, not only for the brands. Brands have done an incredible job, but it's actually our turn now to understand, right, how can we do better to service the brands that are paying us to advertise? So I think we're kind of in that stage of influencer marketing.
Sure. So if you could give us an example then, I suppose. We saw that Toyota one, so maybe that's a good one to talk about, of just a recent partnership that worked well. What made that Toyota one, for example, work as well as it did?
Yeah, it was.
Assuming it worked well.
No, it was. It was fantastic, and it was really interesting because we went out to Saudi Arabia to cover the Dakar Rally. They had a team that were involved, and they just wanted to sort of document my experience enjoying it. They came up with quite a few short form concepts when I was out there. We worked collaboratively on what those would be. None of those actually sat on my own personal channels. They all sat on Toyota. And I think the one that was played here did sort of 1.5 million views on Instagram, which is obviously fantastic. But that really comes from us working together to figure out, right, how can we do this and how can we get it to 1.5 million views? So that was a fantastic partnership. And, sometimes brands always think, oh, if it's not sitting on their channel, then maybe they don't want to have any sort of creative involvement in this. But they came to me, we sat on a call before I even went out there, and we just ran through some of the ideas, tweaked a few of them. How can we make them better? And I think, just even being invested in those calls meant that when I was out there, I was actually thinking about this from a creator's perspective. How's this video going to turn out for them, rather than, oh, they're just paying me to be out here, to be on camera. Let me just tick the boxes and head home. Like, I wanted to make a sick video for them.
So there's clearly a big emphasis on authenticity then when it comes to these partnerships. I can tell that you yourself are very invested in the product, even though it wasn't something that sat on your own channels.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of just have to find those people that are willing to invest into what you're trying to achieve as well. That can be really difficult too. And to be honest with you, I don't actually know the answer to finding those people. But one way certainly is by just looking around at other partnerships that they've done. Does it look like they're actually invested in the content? Are they trying to have a good time on camera? Or does it just kind of feel like they're ticking a box, they're cashing their check and heading home? And, I like to think you'll be able to watch a video and gather somewhat of a vibe, but it's really important that you find the people that want to work with you. And that's, again, why long-term partnerships, I always think, are the way forward.
We'll come back onto long-term partnerships and the benefits of those, but there's a growing trend of micro and nano influencers. Now, you yourself, with almost 8 million followers across your platforms, you're certainly one of those macro influencers that people talk about. But when should brands shift between considering using a large macro influencer such as yourself, and when should they consider those sort of smaller nano influencers that perhaps only have a few thousand followers?
Yeah, I mean, I think, nano influencers, micro influencers, I think they are extremely powerful when used correctly, and maybe used is the wrong word, but work with them correctly, purely because I actually think might be shooting myself in the foot here, but the ROI you get on those influencers is actually really, really good. So if you're just trying to shift a particular product, or really trying to get conversions, then I think they're probably the people that you want to target. And the downside to that is that you're going to have to end up working with a lot of these different people. You're going to struggle to really foster a relationship with these creators, especially over a really long term, unless you have a massive team. And if you do, then maybe that's a good option for you. But yeah, it's going to take a lot more effort, and not only that, but a lot more mistakes as well. You're going to get errors in this stuff. You're going to be chasing for content. It can get tedious. It can get a bit tough. So they certainly are an extremely powerful group of influencers. And then to go on to sort of your larger ones, I think this is really where the brand awareness comes in, really making sure that your brand actually aligns with the person you're working with at that level. That's really where you have to think, like, look, if this person is advertising this thing, is that the person I want to be involved with this brand? You're going to be paying a lot more money to access this person. So you really need to make sure the due diligence is there. Again, you want to make sure at this level that this person has somewhat of a buy-in to your brand and has an interest in your brand. And that's on you to make sure that that person has that. If they don't, I really think that you're just going to end up spending money and you're going to go home crying. Like, it's just not going to work out. I've seen the stories, I've seen the TikToks of people that work in this space, and they're like, I've just spent my entire salary on one person, on one post, and it drove 0 sales. And it's like, when we're talking at this level, looking at some sort of long-term partnership is definitely the way. There's been lots of examples of that, and where it's really paid off. And so, yeah, that's sort of my comparison between the two. But brand awareness is is certainly the play when you're looking at these bigger influencers.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate your candor there, Cal, and I'm sure everyone else does. I was seeing your team member Sammy was starting to sweat when you're selling yourself. You keep selling yourself short for those micro and nano influencers. But I think you make a really good point, and obviously there's the audience aspect of it too, and trying to tap into a niche, perhaps with those sort of smaller scale influencers and audiences, as opposed to someone like yourself, where you say awareness is really important because the awareness of a macro influencer stretches a lot bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same when it comes to dealing with like community events. You know, if you're dealing with nano, you can get a few people maybe as a buy-in, but if you need to activate something that really needs a large amount of people, then that's another example there. Accessing someone's community, really doing something community-driven can be so powerful. And I actually think this works a lot better when you're sort of dealing with the 250K plus influence. I think below that, there'll certainly be an interest, but to really break through the noise, you kind of need to go above that, depending on your goals.
When it comes to the content you're putting out there on various platforms, do you find that you're doing a lot of cross-posting the same stuff across different channels, or are you sort of optimizing something for this will work better on YouTube versus something that will work better on an Instagram or a TikTok or even your own channels? How do you go about making sure that stuff's optimized to perform as well as possible on each channel?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of answered the question for me to an extent. I think that you do have to look at all these platforms as individual platforms. They all are optimized completely differently. And, you know, personally, if I was given the choice, then yeah, doing something different for every single platform would be ideal. It does come at a higher production cost. You know, you got to come up with a creative for it. It takes longer. You can repurpose content, put it out there. For the most part, unless it is something like a podcast or something along those lines, I just don't think you're getting the most out of it. And so if you can, get something fresh, get something new for each individual channel, I think that's probably the play.
What about you personally? Because you mentioned your podcast, and obviously the Fellas podcast is great, and that style of content's very different compared to the things that you put out on your YouTube and then the short form as well across TikTok and Instagram. How do you go about engaging with your audience on those different channels when working with a brand? Do you find that your audience differs depending on the medium and the platform, or is it by and large the same people find you across all areas?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think I'm going through a bit of a shift myself in terms of my content. If you go and look at my YouTube, you mentioned it there, I'm really niching down into food content. I found that, from a creator's perspective, I needed to niche down. It was too broad. You never really knew what my next video was going to be, and I don't actually think that's a good thing. So I really wanted to niche down on that, but I still love just waffling absolute shit on a podcast. Sorry for my language, but it's so much fun. I love sitting next to my best friend and just chatting nonsense for an hour and a half. And so that for me is just a lot of fun. I'm very lucky that it's become extremely successful for us, but I'll always want to have that. And certainly the audience is different, but there is still some level of crossover there. A lot of people like to just sort of like watch my food videos. They're kind of on in the background, whatever that means nowadays. But yeah, it's like on the TV. And I've noticed that the same people are watching the podcast in a similar way as well. So yeah, there is some sort of crossover, but I do think there's a difference. So my answer doesn't help anyone. Yeah, sorry.
It's an interesting shift you would have gone through in the 15 years is you're now not just, the days of YouTube, it was very much more housed on the mobile or the PC, and now people are putting it up on their TVs in their living rooms. Is that a bit of a different shift? Has that been interesting for you? Like your own little TV show that you're putting out there.
Yeah, look, it's awesome. Like YouTube have come out and said that, that it's mainly being, particularly in the UK now, it's mainly being consumed on the TV. And I think that's actually a really important thing to keep in mind, particularly, again, from a creator's perspective, but ultimately from a brand as well. Need to be thinking, look, how are these people going to be consuming my content? Or is a lot of this through the TV? Is it on in the background? Okay, well, if somebody's watching this in the background while they're making food, how can I grab their attention? That first 3 seconds of the ad might need to be a little bit louder, maybe a little bit more in your face to grab that person away from if they were just watching this in the background. So I'm a huge fan. I love the idea that people are watching my content on TVs versus a mobile. I spend a lot of money on really nice cameras, and I feel like they show up a lot better on a TV than they do a mobile phone. So that's really exciting. The ad rates as well. My sort of CPMs are much higher from people that watch on TV as well. So my bank account has increased as well. We love TV. But yeah, it's all these little things that you have to keep in mind. Like, you know, how are people consuming this? When I first started YouTube was strictly only consumed on desktop, on a laptop. And I was making content for that. Then it moved to mobile. So I was there like, oh, okay. And you know, even when we're thinking about thumbnails on a mobile are so much smaller, and you're kind of there like, right, are people even going to notice that? I'm not sure if it's even worth our time doing that. And now that they're on TV, they're massive. So they're like, oh, okay, wow, we need to make sure the quality of these thumbnails are really good and they look great on a TV. So, yeah.
It's a lot to think about.
Sorry, yeah, I realized I just went off there. But
No, personally, I mean, navigating that, better you than me, Cal, that's for sure. Now, when it comes to a brand partnership, what does good look like on the results side? How are you measuring that success, both on your end as well as on the brand's end? What are some of the metrics?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing for me is that it integrates nice and smoothly into the content. And I managed to work alongside the brand to make sure that it doesn't feel like a disruptive experience when watching this ad ultimately. And then not only that, but, you know, can I integrate it in my own way? Does it really need to be 90 seconds, 120 seconds in one block? Is there any way I can just split this up throughout it so that it's stopping people from skipping through the content, so that I can make sure we have our retention graph in our analytics on our YouTube studio? I want to keep that as flat as possible. How can I do that? Is that by kind of splitting it up and keep people interested, like, oh, okay, I'll watch the 15 seconds of this ad. I know I'm going to get something else in a second. And then it comes back in again in another 60 seconds. And there's loads of different creative ways that you can do it. But you got to convince the brand that this is actually going to be worth it. And I think it genuinely just takes a bit of experimenting to figure out, does this work? Does this not work? How can I improve it? So for me, from a creator's point of view, it's about how seamless it goes into it. And ultimately, you know, the editing from our side as well. A lot of the comments, we love it when they say, oh, this was the best brand deal I've seen edited. This is really good. Like, this is sick. Love it. And a lot of times I'll get Instagram DMs like, hey, I downloaded that app that you told me about. It's so sick. You know, thanks for putting me on. Things like that. So seeing that feedback as well is really important. And then from a brand perspective, I think it's just important that you guys share what you're trying to achieve, what your goal is with me, and we can both work towards that. My goal is that you come back and be like, Cal, that was really successful. Let's do another one. Like, that's what I want to hear at the end of it. But the only way I can do that is if you guys share with me your goals and what we're trying to achieve, so that ultimately I can help. I mean, don't get me wrong. We'll have the deliverables in the contract and we'll do our best to stick to it. But I don't mind going a little bit over if I feel like there's a buy-in here and there's a good chance of us working again in the future. And ultimately, I enjoy and I use your product.
You mentioned that earlier, the idea of the long-term brand partnerships and conducting those on an ongoing basis. That seems like it's a bit more of a recent trend, I suppose, but elaborate for us a little more on why that's something you've begun to push for and why it's something that brands should be thinking about when they're engaging for the first time with a new creator.
Yeah. Long-term partnerships, they're quite risky. I understand from a brand perspective. They're also quite expensive to do. And a lot of the time, I think people look at it the wrong way. They say, oh, well, once I've advertised with this person once, I've sold to their audience. Like, if I do it again, then, okay, there might be some new viewers, but for the most part, I'm kind of just targeting the same people from the last video, but I'm paying the same price. And I really, really believe that in this age, it's all about creating an association with the creator. And once you do that over several videos, you kind of get known as the guy, and they kind of expect it. You know, you see comments like, oh, I'm looking forward to seeing this ad in this video. They know what's coming because we've advertised a few times together before. And so once it almost becomes a meme, in a way, in a good way, hopefully. And once you start doing that, you start building and integrating into their community, and they really start to catch on. So for me, I think long-term partnerships are fantastic, but not even just a sense of, oh, let's just, we're going to advertise on 3 of your next 9 videos. It's like, okay, let's do that. Is there an in-person activity that we can activate on as well? Let's take a look at the other socials that you've got going on, and really just hammering away at the full suite of content that the person has to offer. So I think that's, for me, how I would see a long-term partnership versus just thinking, okay, we're going to do X amount of videos over the next 6 months or whatever. Like, really try and integrate into the person's community and tap into their community. That's how long-term partnerships work. I think great examples like Gymshark have done a fantastic job of doing that. There's a lot of brands out there that really get it, but like I said, it can be expensive to do that. So
now, we've got a ton of questions coming in from the audience, which is great. Do keep submitting those using the app. But I've got one more I wanted to ask you, Cal, before we move on to the audience Q&A. You've obviously grown beyond, you're UK-based, but you've grown beyond that into very much a global influencer. You're out in Saudi. You said you were traveling just last week. So as that expansion has happened into new geographies, are there any big differences in terms of working with brands from different territories, different countries, not your own?
I'm not too sure, I actually don't. I personally, I don't think I've done enough to give you a proper answer here. I'm not too sure that I've experienced that enough. I've certainly, obviously I traveled, I meet a lot of our fans that watch our stuff, and that always surprises me. Is you'd be amazed at just how many people in the weirdest parts in the world will just like come up to me and be like, oh, I've watched this video, or I've seen this, and that's always amazing to hear. Again, the beauty of digital is the fact that it is consumed from all over the world. So if you are an online business, then why not? Like, this makes sense. But then also locally, I'm always sending over my demographics, and they're like, oh, we really want this specific audience. And that might be for whatever reason. Maybe they've been set targets to hit in that particular region. But if you are an online business, then you really are just accessing everybody that watches this video, and it seems like a bit of a no-brainer. So, yeah, I feel I don't want to give too much of an answer to that question because I actually don't know, particularly from a brand's perspective. So. And
you yourself, you maintain consistency in terms of how you produce the content on your end. Then you're not changing it to adapt to certain geographies.
No, I actually think YouTube have introduced this auto dubbing feature, and they're developing that right now. So I actually think we're going to see a lot of content creators, particularly on YouTube. It wouldn't surprise me if we start seeing this across other platforms as well, where our international audiences are really going to start cranking up now. Some of the tech that I've seen that they've shown me to do with it looks incredible. So I'm actually really excited to grow in other markets, and yeah, that just is just more opportunity for us. So.
Amazing. Well, we've got some time to spare here for the audience Q&A, but we've got quite a few questions to get through. So I'll do my best to get to as many as we can, but we'll keep to time. The first one, Cal, it comes back to those long-term partnerships and working with a brand. Is there anything that brands do when they approach you that might put you off working with them, whether that be sort of perceived limitation on your own content style in the production phase, or anything else that you might want to mitigate if you're a brand approaching an influencer, something you might want to stay away from?
Ooh, good question. Just what are the red flags?
Yeah, what are the red flags from brands?
I think you're probably better off asking my manager, Sammy, that question. I think the first thing is when they come and there's really no room for any creative leeway. I have no problem with people coming like, hey, we've got this idea. Do you think you could make this work? That's fine, because I feel like there might be a middle ground here where we can make this work. But a lot of time they're like, no, we want it like this. We want it to go out in a very strict way. And then also that, like, I like to invest a lot of my money back into the production of these videos, and that comes at a price, and I want to make sure that I'm delivering a high quality video to my audience. That's ultimately why I do this in the first place. So if you're not in a position where you can help me with that production cost, and I'm more than happy to outline, look, this is going to production. I'm not taking this and heading on holiday. Like, this is going towards the video that we're making together now. Then yeah, I'm not very interested in that. And a lot of times you'll see they'll try and cut corners, try and do things for as cheap as possible. And it's like, look, I want to make a sick video. You want a sick ad on a video that is hopefully going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 million views here. At least give me the best chance to deliver that to you.
This is another really good one from our audience. When it comes to your own brand and that personal level of authenticity, obviously you do still have to work in a partnership on a particular product or whatever it is a brand might want to promote. So how do you balance brand authenticity with working with influencers? I suppose, how do you align everyone's interests as best you can?
I mean, I think that happens before any contract signed, before any deal is agreed. It's just like, look, is your product, is what you're offering, will that appeal to my audience? Will that integrate nicely into my content? And it's on the brand and it's also on the creator to be able to both look at it and have just a frank conversation and be like, actually, we just don't, we've spoken about this for a couple of days. We jumped on a call. We've seen if we can work it out, and we just don't see creatively how this is going to work out. I think you just have to be open and honest rather than kind of like finding that middle ground, be like, okay, well, we'll kind of try it, and then nobody really has a buy-in on the video, and you just end up with something that neither of you guys are happy around. You've spent a bunch of cash, and I've spent a bunch of time and effort. I've got a bad performing video, you've got a bad performing ad, and we're all fuming. So I think you've got to iron this stuff out before any contract signed.
This is an interesting one, actually, and it goes on to another good question from the audience. Now, you don't have to name names if you don't want to, but is there a partnership that you've had in the past that for whatever reason didn't quite pan out as either you wanted or the brand wanted, and what prompted it to fall apart?
I'm not going to name names because they could be in the audience. I just don't know. But there's definitely been times where they've taken the piss, like just straight up, they've taken the piss. Like we've agreed on something, and they've come back and said, oh, well, we wanted it actually to be like this, or like, oh, well, I've sent it to my manager and they said they want it like this. Well, I don't give a shit about what your manager said because you told me this is how we were going to do it, so let's do it like this. And this is the way that I think it should be done creatively. You had agreed on this and you'd even signed off on this. And now that it's gone out, you're not happy about it. So I'm sorry, you need to have a conversation with your manager and maybe align on your goals together because it just didn't work out. And so for me, that's definitely a really frustrating part. And it's almost trying to stick the blame on the creator when it's like, no, internally there was something that went wrong there. Don't try and stick it on me. And then also, I don't mind doing it, and we also have to accept that not every ad is going to perform the way you expect. Sometimes they do under-deliver. Sometimes things don't work out the way you wanted to. And a lot of the time, if you've had a really great relationship, I've got no problem chucking up an extra story here or there. If it's, if it has under-delivered and we've had a great relationship and I still see us working together in a different capacity potentially in the future, that's fine. But if you don't, if you're just coming to me almost a little bit rude, like, oh, it's performed poorly, we've come up with this idea for a story that you could put out there or an Instagram you could put out there, I'm just like, no, read the contracts. That's
Cal, you put everyone on notice there. I like it. Not taking anyone's excuses. No. Thank you very much for your time. That's been a great discussion. Calfreezy, everyone.
Thank you.
And that concludes this episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. A big thank you to my guests and colleagues, Reem Makari, Jyoti Rambai, and Robin Langford for joining me at the top of the episode. I'd also like to thank Calfreezy for participating in his session at the beginning of Unlocked on the main stage of day one and for letting us share that with you all, putting it out into the world. It was a really insightful discussion, so I hope you enjoyed that. I should say as well, keep an eye on the podcast feed this week because we're going to be coming to you with a special sponsored episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast that was actually recorded live at Unlocked with Rakuten Advertising. That's all about affiliate marketing. I don't want to spoil too much, but keep an eye on the podcast feed because we won't just be back in a fortnight's time. We'll be back in a few days' time and you'll get to hear a live podcast, the first ever live podcast for Performance Marketing Unlocked. Of course, before I let you go, I would be remiss if I didn't thank you, the loyal listener, for tuning in each and every fortnight as you do. Please, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice and find us on social media. We've got content coming your way on LinkedIn, YouTube, and TikTok, so make sure you don't miss us. In the meantime, have an amazing week, and you'll be hearing from me again very shortly. Bye for now.